It is my pleasure to bring out the gentleman who's going to be leading today's discussion, Glynn Martin. He is on the Photo Friends board. He is the primary author of the book that he's been working on for a couple of years. He is the curator of the exhibition downstairs. He was also the co-author of the Los Angeles Times bestseller, LAPD 53, work he created with world-renowned novelist James Ellroy, who generously wrote the foreword to our book. Following his graduation from USC, Martin spent more than 30 years in and around the Los Angeles Police Department and continues to volunteer for the Los Angeles Police Memorial Foundation. Martin was born and raised in Glendale, where he still lives with his wife, 2 grown children, and an oversized Labrador, which I can attest is quite sweet despite his size. Glynn, come on out.
Let me talk about that. Thank you. Well, thank you all for spending the afternoon with us. I realize you've selected us over the NFL, and that is quite a high honor, I must say, at this point in the season. So I have the good fortune of looking at in front of me at what you guys are looking at behind me, and there's an awful lot of dope in that picture, and some of it's even on that table. So the 2 guys in the center are my partner and I. My partner happens to be the one that's just a scant bit taller than I am, but this was the record-setting seizure of cocaine for LAPD that we made back in 1991. It's 4,600 pounds of cocaine in wrapped kilo packages on the table there. A few months later, we seized an additional 5,400 pounds on a connected case. So the record still stands. My partner and I had 10,000 pounds of cocaine, and I'm here to tell you that every line of it made it into evidence. So, you know, part of what we got to do here today is to dispel some of the myths about cops here. And no, cops don't have the best dope, because we had 5 tons of it, and I never saw any of it. Anyway, really, this is just my introduction. My time with the LAPD, I spent 20 years as a sworn member of the department. Worked all over the city in uniform, some notable specialized assignments, major narcotics, obviously, 3 years of vice, 4 years of terrorism, the rest in uniform in all parts of the city. Shortly after my retirement, I was recruited by the department to come back and run the Los Angeles Police Museum, which is a nonprofit separate and apart from the LAPD. It resides in the old Highland Park Police Station. I left there a couple of years ago. Excuse me. And took a job at the Norton Simon Museum, so still in the museum world, and enjoying my retirement from the LAPD and remain connected to the department through the Police Memorial Foundation and the LA County Peace Officers Memorial Committee. Enough about me. In my tenure at the Police Museum, I did have the opportunity to co-author my first book, LAPD 53, again with renowned author James Ellroy, who's not only a colleague but a friend, to the point that I was able to reach out to him for the foreword for this book. Really, the story in this book is one of teamwork, because there was a whole bunch of folks that helped me put this book together, and I think it's consistent or analogous with what went on with the Night Stalker case. The murders were spread through various law enforcement jurisdictions, and it took a task force to be assembled, and some very talented folks on the task force to actually pull this together, identify Richard Ramirez, and bring him to justice. And principal amongst those is our guest today. He's retired from Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, 38 years in law enforcement, 26 years in homicide, 6 as a supervising lieutenant, the rest as an investigator. Handled more than 400 homicides, which in this day and age is a monstrous number considering the 4 million people in the city of Los Angeles. Less than 265 homicides in 2014, right around the 300 number since then. So stop and think about that. Gil handled more than 400, 4 million people, there's 300 murders, so it's a huge, huge number, storied career, and the fact of the matter is he took Richard Ramirez off the street. So that being said, I'd like you guys to give a warm welcome to retired Lieutenant, former Chief of Police, Gil Carrillo.
Thank you, Glenn.
And I got to say, that's a fantastic picture.
I love that picture. You know? I never looked that good in real life.
So we need to take a quick trip back to 1985. As I mentioned, Gil spent a lot of time in homicide. In fact, that's where he was. This is the photograph. This is the day. Gil's leading Richard Ramirez, who's wearing the black Jack Daniels T-shirt. Is that from leading him out of Hollenbeck, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. Leading him out of Hollenbeck.
Yeah, and there's a story behind that, but I think we better get to the main story here. I was working the Special Problems Unit, which was, we were deployed on various crime problems up in Hollywood. That's me at the end of the Blue Arrow in uniform. Again, the guy in the middle was my longtime partner. He's the one I worked major narcotics with. This is where we were in 1985. I was in Hollywood. Gil was already handling homicides throughout the county of Los Angeles. And really, this is what we were both doing. He was handling the investigative side, trying to close the net around Richard Ramirez. For us that were uniformed officers or plainclothes officers, just regular boots on the ground cops at the time, once Gil and his folks identified the pattern and put together the fact that this was these murders, a whole series of murders were the deeds of one human being, the police department, the Los Angeles Police Department, kind of changed things. For us, we were very restrictive on driving with our red lights and siren on, a Code 3 response in police parlance. When it was determined that this was the work of one human being, in particular when the name the Night Stalker stuck with Richard Ramirez, they started dispatching calls Code 3. Citing him a Night Stalker here, citing him a Night Stalker there, citing him a Night Stalker over here, respond Code 3. Well, as we know, none of those calls were true because it was a group of committed citizens in East Los Angeles that grabbed him, and despite all the dozens, if not hundreds of calls I responded to thinking it was a Night Stalker, in fact, for the final month, the August of '85, my partner and I were assigned in plain clothes riding bicycles through the Hollywood neighborhoods with uniformed officers as support. During the middle of the night, looking for open doors and windows, anything that could have been a target of the Night Stalker, and responding to burglary there now calls, pedaling our backsides off on bicycles. Gil, meanwhile, was putting all the pieces together. And
if I'd have known it was going to be this scary, I'd have stood home.
How did it all start for you guys?
It started out, you hate to say routine mundane murder, but March 17, 1985, I received a phone call that said, you have a homicide. Dale Okazaki met her untimely demise, and Maria Hernandez was a surviving victim. And I went to my first murder. And then you just start looking at things that come up, and similarities and dissimilarities, and there was something there between the physical descriptions, because one thing that we weren't saying publicly, and I wrote a search warrant on April 10th about it, but there were some child abductions going on, and all of them had the same similar physical characteristics. And there was one particular shoe print that showed up both at homicide scenes and with the child abductions, and that was the shoe print of the Avia shoe. That shoe, of which once we start focusing on the shoe and let's get some studies done, I can tell you without equivocation that on January 9th, 1985, 1,356 pair of Model 440 Avias arrived in New York from Taiwan for distribution throughout the U.S., of which 6 pair ended up in the state of California, 1 pair ended up in L.A. So, when you start putting stuff together, you know, it all comes together.
Yeah, I think that applause is way overdue. I remember Gil telling me this a couple of years ago when we first sat down to talk about this, and when he called out those numbers, because we're in law enforcement, it had my jaw to hang. So I was duly impressed. So, and this is why, as he touched on the first murder back St. Patrick's Day, 1985, or first murder here in Los Angeles, I should say. And this is why law enforcement was mobilized, why Gil and his partners were in a task force configuration. The crimes listed here are obviously extremely violent and very significant. I wasn't attuned to the child abductions. Were there any that we could actually prove that were him?
Well, we initially filed, it must have filed 5 what we call kitty cases when we filed the murders. And there was one in particular. It was a 6-year-old little girl from Arcadia that was kidnapped, abducted, taken down to a Skid Row hotel, and we were told about it. I was out there on the 28th of June because I had a murder out there. She had been abducted on the 26th of June, and Sergeant Brandsma, female sergeant from Arcadia Police Department, told me about it. And I said, well, just keep her in tow. We don't know if anything's involved yet, but wait until we have something and then we'll see. You continue to work your case. Well, we did, and we found out that she was part of it. And at 6 years old, she is the brightest, sharpest little child I've ever met, to include my own. I have 3 children of my own that were mentally gifted minors, but I mean,
And they're all here, right?
I still worry about them, and they're here. They're here today. At 6 years old, I was introduced to her. We had a lineup downtown, and she was coloring a little coloring book, and to keep her occupied. And her parents, God bless them, they were super pro-police. I walked up and introduced myself. I said, could you introduce your daughter to myself? I said, because we're going to go in this room right now, and you're not going to be able to go with her. And a lot of kids are afraid of me because I'm so big, and others, I'm fine with. Well, they said, sweetheart, we want to introduce you to somebody. She turned around, she goes, oh, I know him. That's Detective Gil Carrillo. He's working on the Night Stalker case. I've seen him on the news. Now, 41, 44, 47 are my kids, their age today. I still can't get them to watch the news. This one was doing it at 6 years old. We had the lineup. Any questions go up, and we instructed them. If anybody wants to go up on stage to get a closer look at the lineup, you line up against this wall, you take your steps on up. If you stop in front of one, you have to stop in front of all of them. If not, just walk to the end of the wall, come back, take your seat, don't talk, don't say anything. If you have a question, raise your hand. Lineup was done. Her hand was the first one that went up. She was the first one in line, by the way. Her hand went up and said, yes, sweetheart, you have a question? Yes. Do I write the number 2, or do I write the word 2? And it said, whatever you'd like. And so we filed 5 cases. That was September of 85. January of 86, we're getting ready. We're preparing for preliminary hearing. And so we went down her house. We wanted to interview her. It was my partner, Frank Salerno, Deputy DA Phil Halpin, and myself. We went there, and Mom opened the door. She says, come on in. And says, how is she? She said, well, she's a bit apprehensive, but she knows she's going to talk to you, and she's okay. So they walked her out. Mommy walked her out with her hand, and they sat down on the couch, and Mommy plopped her up on her lap, and she said, sweetheart, do you remember these gentlemen? And she said, yes. And then she whispered something in Mommy's ear, and then she started laughing. And she said, she wants me to let you know, pointing to me, she remembers you the best because you remind her of her teddy bear. I've never seen a tattooed teddy bear that's all buffed out with a rag on his head. He's a pretty mean-looking bear. So the DA asked her, in short, do you remember going to that theater with us that day? She says, yes. And she says, and I remember picking number 2. And he says, well, okay, well, why do you remember picking number 2 so much? Because we wanted to make sure somebody hadn't been priming her. And why did you pick number 2? She says, I knew it was him as soon as he walked out. But I knew how absolutely positive I had to be, how important this was. And I'll go to court and testify if it means keeping him locked up so he can't hurt any other little girls.
Wow. Incredible stuff.
It still bothers me.
Yeah.
I got up, I said, excuse me, and I walked out of the room. I walked to the kitchen. My partner, Salerno, lasted about 20 seconds longer than I did. The DA, he's an attorney, he's got no heart. No, he lasted about a minute, and then he came into the kitchen with us, and he just said, hey, fellas, what do you say we dismiss all the kitty cases? We've got enough with the adult murders. I said, fine, no need to put the kids through it, their families through it. It was all going to be eyewitness testimony. There was no evidence. of course, shrinks
in the kid cases.
in the kid cases. Then in 2010, right after I retired, I get a call from San Francisco. And they had found an old case from 1984. There was a 9 or a 10-year-old little girl, and they made Richard through DNA, which now, gave us the link. Yes, there's some physical evidence that he did do this.
Wow. It's an incredible story. And Gil brings up some names, A, to familiarize you, 2, to recognize them, and 3, to thank them. Frank Salerno was Gil's partner. I believe it was Frank that selected you for this case specifically.
No. Specifically, it was I answered the page. They called me and said, you got a murder. I had a regular partner, Jim Mercer, at that time.
Right.
And so after we had a couple of these things, and I started saying, hey, I think one man's doing this, then the captain put Frank Salerno in charge, like of a acting lieutenant in charge of a little group, see if there was something there to really follow up on.
So Frank was Frank and Gil ran this thing. Phil Halpin and Alan Yokelson. Phil's passed away, if I remember correctly.
Yes, Phil's passed away.
And Alan Yokelson were the prosecutors on this case, which, since you've got the numbers in front of you, obviously a very, very complex case. This many counts, and I'm speaking from personal experience, this many counts, A, it's difficult to get filed with a district attorney, and B, it's very difficult to convince a jury that somebody's guilty of 28, 39, 53 separate crimes. These guys, Gil, Frank, Yokelson, and Phil Halpin, returned guilty verdicts on all of these counts. It's a phenomenal achievement in and of itself. Now, this is the other aspect of it, and I'd like to say that when you bring law enforcement together in close proximity to one another with a common goal, that everybody plays well in the sandbox, but that's not necessarily the case. Another level at which I admire Gil and his task force for bringing this together, because you look and see, just in the city of LA alone, there was, downtown LA, there was a crime, Glassell Park, Northridge, Sun Valley, and then all these neighboring jurisdictions, Burbank, Glendale, Rosemead, Whittier, Monrovia, Sierra Madre, Diamond Bar, and then the final crimes from Orange County, if I remember correctly.
Yes,
yeah.
Bishop Bugle.
So, and then the San Francisco was what he was just talking about the find later on that was a 9-year-old girl that was murdered up there that was attributed to Ramirez much after the prosecution and his incarceration. Going back to this, so you saw the huge number of crimes there. It means all these police organizations have to come together. They've all got to decide that they want to cooperate with Gil and Frank and keep Gil from coming out of his teddy bear mode. So that in and of itself was a challenge. Did you want to share with them some of the difficulties that you face when something like this goes on?
It's difficult because when you work with cops, everybody's got an ego. And put this task force together, everybody's got a suspect. Everybody has a favorite suspect, and I heard everything from, for those old-time Dodger fans around here, they thought it was Mariano Duncan, because he was looking like the guy. I had one old-time ex-Marine homicide investigator that was working on the task force, longtime friend, Willie Wilson. He sat there and he's slamming stuff down. He's upset. And he was what we called a clue clown. We'd give them, they'd be assigned clues, and they were clue clowns. Go out and follow this up. And he's cussing and spitting. And so, what's wrong now, Willie? He says, well, look at this. The guy looks just like him. Yeah, that. The only problem is, he says, you get down to the bottom, he says, the guy's a midget. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, yeah. He says, the guy's a short person. He says, he's less than 4 foot tall, and I'm looking for a tall guy. Said, okay, Willie, go get some more coffee and then get back at it. And trying to get everybody's favorite. Everybody wanted to push it on you, and you have certainly the bigwigs, the sheriff. You have, that time, Mr. Davis, and you have Sheriff Block, and they all want it solved because this is making them look bad. A serial killer running around that we can't find. And then you have the locals, and everybody wants a piece of the action, let alone the stuff you got to deal with at work. But then I know you're going to find this difficult to believe. I do have a wife and family and kids and sisters and mom, and you're worried about protecting them and their problems. The pipe broke. Well, I don't care about any pipes right now. Jesus Christ. And I was just reminding my wife the other day of calling home, very typically calling to check on my family, and she told me that she had caught my 13-year-old daughter then, caught her crying in the bedroom. And she says, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Nothing. No, something's wrong. What is it?" And she says, "I just want my dad home." Got a lump in my throat. I felt bad because I wasn't there. And I hung up the phone, and I wanted to beat my wife because how can you tell me this stuff right now? I got to concentrate on murders, and I'm hearing this, and it was really it was a tough road to go. Only because I had good friends, hard-working colleagues around me that allowed me to continue going forward.
And what Gil's related is kind of the direction that we wanted to take with this particular book. There's an authoritative recounting of the crimes and whatnot, the book written by Gil Carrillo. The specific name of it escapes me right now. Really, the focus of this was what these crimes did to the greater Los Angeles area and an entire region back in the summer of 1985. And as you can see, nobody was immune to it. The lead investigator's own family here had their concerns about it. It was a tough time for everybody, and that was our focus here with our interviews. Gil's here to talk about the important work that was done. But the contributors and the other folks that we spoke to in putting this together, it was just remarkable, A, of the recall of how rotten that summer was, and B, the things that they did that were out of the ordinary for them. Folks that would never own a gun or had never owned a gun before had purchased guns. People that had an outdoor dog that all of a sudden was barricaded in the bedroom with them. All kinds of things that went on that just turned the Southland on edge that year. When you mention about all the folks that you worked with, I'd be neglecting something. My father responded to the couple of the Keatings in the city of Glendale. He was in charge of the detectives at the time. Was this the centerpiece?
Wow, that was
kind of the nighttime burglaries. I mean,
yeah, that was July the 5th. We were out there. And that was the Whitney Bennett residence. And we went inside, and we were called out, and I can remember laughing at my partner because we'd been working. I mean, we must have got home about 3 o'clock in the morning. Now they're calling me up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they're saying, "You got another one, it's up here, Sierra Madre." And I said, "All right." And they give me the information, and they said, "Well, she's not dead yet, but they want us to handle it, and she's going to die." And I said, "Okay, fine." And they said, "We'll go ahead and call your partner." And I said, "You better let me call him. He's not going to be happy, I know. He's the Italian stallion." And so I called him up, and I said, "Hey," and he hates being called Frankie. And I told him, "Hey, Frankie, we got one." And he says, "Gil, now's no time for your stupid jokes." I said, "No, Frankie, this is the real deal. We got one. You better get your paper and pencil. We got to roll." And he says, "Gil, I'm telling you, I'm tired. Don't be messing around." That's okay, Frankie. Tell you what, I'll give you the address. You show up if you want to. I'm going. I ain't got time for this. See you later, Frankie. Hope to see you at the party. And I hung up on him. Well, he showed up, and it was a real call. And we go out there, and it's about 11:40 in the morning. And Giselle Lavigny, who looks like she should be on Dragnet, has a little white coat on, the lab coat. She had her hair in a bun. She's a criminalist. And she comes out of the bedroom, and she says, "Hey, fellas, found something maybe of interest to you. I think you got to come take a look at it." And so we walked into the bedroom, and there was a comforter with a bloody Avia shoe print on it. And it still gives me chills right now. I'm telling you. And I just said, "Kiss my patooters," or something like that. And he said, yeah, kiss your patooters. And we walked back out into the living room, and he says, okay, we've got us a serial killer. This is the serial killer, definitively. And called the captain up. He says, hey, it's definitely on, because now we can put that shoe print at various, all the way back to March 29th, and we can do it with the 10-year-old girl that was kidnapped out of Northeast Division. We could put it at a few places, and then the race came on. Then it was good. And we found out 2 days after this, we had found a partial bloody footprint at Mary Cannon's house in Arcadia, just a couple of miles away from this residence, and it was the AV also. So that's when, and we'd kept the press at bay. We had kept them at bay. They saw us on June the 28th at a residence, and they said, what's going on? Routine, mundane murder, that's all it is. And then 4 days later, they see us at Mary Cannon's house, and they said, hey, you were just over at Patty Lane Higgins' house. Yeah, but since it's in Arcadia, we're close, we're out here, we just said, we'll take it. And they don't know what's going on. And we didn't tell them about this one because you don't have to notify the press unless it's a murder. And so we didn't notify them about this one, so they didn't. And by the way, Whitney survived. She did not die. Oh. Just as a side note, her name is now Whitney Salerno. She got married to my partner's son. So with 3 handsome young men going to college, 2 of them are going to college now. But on the 7th of July, that's when the news media really gets involved, because they go out there and they say, hey, wait a minute, now we're back in the city of Monterey Park. And they're saying, hey, wait a minute. You guys are in Arcadia 2 days up there. You guys are here. They're catching up on things, and they know there's a serial killer. And that's when everything hit the fan. So it was tough.
And perhaps you can tell us, and this is going back to direction that we were given working in Hollywood, and I've heard it too many times to count since 1985, and I heard it again here the other day. Was there anything to, and I'm sure some of the folks out there have heard it. Supposedly there was a profile to the, and I know you've heard it, to the residences that Ramirez selected, and it was a yellow house with white trim at the end of the cul-de-sac. Any truth to any of that?
No. Yeah. News media was putting out, it appears that he's hitting yellow houses. Well, if anybody can remember during that time, everything was earth tones. So it was beige, yellow, it was very earthy. And Richard laughed later on when we spent time talking with him, good friends that we were. He says, that was probably put out by Sinclair Paints or something like that, just to get you to buy their paint and paint your house. But there was no truth to that. It was just all houses were like that. And he hit, they said, and he's hitting near freeways. Well, it's hard to find someplace in L.A. that ain't near a freeway. So they write whatever they can, whatever they want to.
What did this do in terms of the coverage, and more specifically and more importantly, did this change anything in the way you approached your investigation?
Not initially. I'm just an honest man. You'd show me that, and I'd say, oh, some kid trying to draw a star. I had no idea about this pentagram stuff. That's the pentagram. That's the sign of the devil. That's satanic in nature. And I didn't know about it. I learned about it, but I didn't know about it then. So it didn't really mean much. And we didn't put out any Satan worship stuff at the time. It wasn't until after. And it's funny because when I'm interviewing him, he gets his finger and he starts going like this on the table right in front of us. And I looked at him as he's doing it. I said, go ahead and fill it in, Rich. And he says, what? I said, go ahead and fill it in, the pentagram. I said, that stuff doesn't bother me. So that's only for you guys that believe in this stuff. Guys in the white hats always win, don't you know that? And he went, like he raced it. And so every time he went out, he tells us he used to get a pen and draw a pentagram on his arm. That gave him strength and power. When he ran away from Officer Starvos, he drew a pentagram on the hood of the car.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Really good guy, misguided.
Yeah. And just to follow up on the running away part, it wasn't exactly a shining moment for Los Angeles Police Department. The officer that he described actually stopped Ramirez on a traffic stop. After looking at him, he questioned him to something along the lines of, "Hey, you're not that guy that's killing everybody, are you?" Yeah, and Richard's response, of course, was to take off on foot, not to be seen again until he was captured in East Los Angeles. So,
Yeah. The Avia footprint. There it is.
yeah. So this is these are kind of the two things that were key in bringing this all together. And Gil's talked about how many times that the footprint was found in various places and in various media, in dirt, in blood, on fabric. So that shoe print tied everything together. That helped these guys learn that there was just a single, very vile human being responsible for this, but they still needed to know who it was. And so that arrived via fingerprints, right? How many, as you've talked about, multiple locations with shoe prints, how many locations did you guys successfully recover fingerprints?
We only recovered a fingerprint 2 times. Once inside of a kitchen of a lady that survived. She died of natural causes. He did nothing to her. I believe her name was Clara Hadsel. And that's because he broke into the house, went in through the kitchen window, and he put the footprint on the sink and a hand as he went in. And it was a burglary. No violent crime. And we wouldn't use it. We did nothing more than to use it we didn't charge him with a crime, to show that there was a fingerprint and a shoe print together.
In the same location?
Yes, because we did not want to minimize anything he did. We wanted to focus on the murders, and we didn't want to show that he was a nice guy and didn't kill somebody. So that was here. Then the most important print was lifted by Orange County Sheriff's Department. And that's when they found it on a stolen car that he used down in Mission Viejo. The car was recovered here in LA City, was towed back because it was their vehicle using their crime, not ours, and they lifted a print off that one.
In all that stuff, then PowerPoint's far from being a comprehensive revisit of the case. Our time here is limited, but all the stuff that Gil's talking about is laid out in the book, photographs, explanations, and whatnot, because that was the key to the case, right?
Yeah.
Or key to the arrest.
That was the key to the arrest. They were able to get that print, match it up to him, because we had an informant working for us at that time, told us the guy's name was Richard or El Despeinado or Ricky. Despeinado, and translated into English, just means the uncombed one. You know, his hair's all curly. And Ricky or Richard. Up in San Francisco, they had a gentleman up there that got arrested, Armando, over the investigator from San Francisco that had the Peter Pan case up there, and that's his real name, although it does sound Mickey Mouse. No, Peter Pan was his real name. They recovered some jewelry. They heard about some jewelry, and we did recover it, and that guy gave a last name of Ramirez. During that time, we didn't have DNA. Fingerprints weren't automated other than for felony convictions. Richard didn't have any felony convictions. He had a misdemeanor conviction, so we told him to hand search. They came up with 8 Richard Ramirez's, and then they matched one of them to the fingerprint, and they said, bingo. They sent us a booking photo. We showed it to our informant Friday at 3 in the afternoon, August 30th, and he said, that's it. Printed thousands of those pictures up, and then they had a press conference that night saying, this is the guy we're looking for. He was captured the next morning.
And the fingerprint, again, automation was just coming to the fingerprint system. That was hand carried to Sacramento, flown up to Sacramento?
No, it went from San Francisco. I don't know how they got it there.
The
San Francisco
Orange
to
County
Sacramento.
print?
No. They had the name Richard Ramirez.
Okay.
And then they had him fingerprint because he had been arrested
In 84.
over here in 84.
Yeah.
So they matched Richard Ramirez with the fingerprint of an arrest over here. That's where we got the booking photo from. And I would venture to say they had to have faxed or something to get it up there right away from Orange County. I wasn't. You stumped me. I don't know.
I thought you were the one that told me. you know, this was in here as a cue so you could tell us how many pairs of shoes there were. The other purpose of this was, as you can see, just from a plain examination, that's just looking at the shoe, just how clear a shoe print that they were able to recover. Not all of them were this clear, though, were they?
No, that was actually taken out of that was a plaster cast. We had a pretty good one off of Joyce Nelson's house, and that was dust lifted. Chuck Vanderwiddy dusted the porch, and same thing out of the house in Sun Valley.
Okay.
Got it out of there. Nice porch type stuff.
Yeah.
Came out good. The rest of the plaster cast, you could see it, but and then Mary Cannon's house, she'd stepped on a rug, brand new rug, and we cut it up, took a hunk out, and had it code 3 down to the crime lab. They took pictures of it. 3 days later, we find out, yes, with the right lighting, it's in the via footprint cast right in before the pile had raised up.
And that's kind of indicative of the measures or the lengths to which Gil and his partners went to deal with this, and B, it speaks greatly to the benefit of DNA. So, the places that this has shown up, it's shown up in blood. Was what he's talking about is fingerprint dust was applied to concrete floor, right?
Seminal fluid.
Seminal fluid. All these different types of physical evidence that they had to A, expertly gather, B, preserve, and C, identify. And now everything, I won't say everything, but so much relies on DNA swabs and whatnot. It was a game changer to law enforcement, and specifically to homicide investigations that, as you guys now know, Gil did for typically what people do for a law enforcement, 26 years, which is a long time to be in the business, much less to be chasing down murderers. As we talked about, this is the booking photo that Gil was just talking about. Was it a car theft arrest in 1984?
Yes, 1984. Yeah. Arrested right downtown LA because he was in a stolen car. And the informant told us he was arrested in a stolen car downtown. We just misdemeanor conviction, couldn't find it. Right. We didn't have a real name.
I'm assuming this was a plea, if it was a misdemeanor?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, he gets arrested for a felony, which is, grand theft auto or driving without an owner's consent, but he goes to court and they let him plead out to a misdemeanor, which, you stop and think, well, how big a deal is it? Well, Gil touched on it in one of the things he mentioned. How big a deal? It meant that his fingerprints didn't go into the automated system. So arguably, you could probably make an argument that the first time they came across the print, had he pled to a felony or gone to trial and been convicted of a felony, he'd have been,
yes,
correct? He'd have been identified earlier.
And now now everything's automated. But
right.
Back then it wasn't. We just ride in on our horses, get off, dust off our boots.
So this is kind of where it came to an end. I very much enjoyed the fact that somebody preserved a photograph of the address, which is probably the photographer or one of the crime scene folks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, here's where we're at. Take a picture of it.
Yep. So he got the call, hey, you need to go to 3733 Hubbard because, they've just whooped ass on the Night Stalker. And the photographer took a photograph of it, and here it lives on 30-plus years later. Initially, it was the sheriff's deputies that responded, took him into custody, and then
the Blue Meanies came across the street. LAPD, there's jurisdictional line there was Indiana Street. The west side was LAPD. The east side was the county area. The yellow dividing line separated it. We're about a half a block into the county side. He had gotten off a bus that morning, and he was running. He had ran across the Santa Ana Freeway, over the sound barriers, over fences, through hill and dale. The guy's kind of tired, but he gets caught in the county side. Well, LAPD is following 911 calls as they're coming across. Hey, somebody in my backyard, and they're going from call to call, and they finally catch up with him. We've got him in custody. And this guy, Andy Ramirez, God bless him, who retired as a captain just last year, good friend of mine. Andy was a boot rookie cop, working a one-man day car. He's happy because he responded to a citizen holding a felony suspect. That's a gimme arrest. It's easy. So he's got him in the back seat of the car. He had called paramedics. They had already put a turban on his head for him. And he's just sitting there. Well, he's gathering information from witnesses. Here come the blue meanies. They get out of the car. One cop cops up and says, "Yep, that's the guy we've been chasing." Took him out of the car, put him in their car, and before you could whistle the USC fight song, he was gone and en route to Hollenbeck. And the deputies from East LA Station wanted to kick the living stuffing out of Andy Ramirez. How could you let the biggest arrest of the decade go to the blue meanies? He was our arrest. And I just laughed. I thought it was funny because I told the guys from East LA, hey, had it gone the other way, you guys would have done the same thing. Come on. And I went down to Hollenbeck that morning, and a lieutenant by the name of Ron Lewis was in charge of robbery, homicide detail. He was down there. There was a big room, second floor at Hollenbeck Station, good-sized room. You'd have thought there was a party going on, cops in there. You know, it was just so. And Ron just said, "Gil, you call the shots. It's all yours, your case." And my partner hadn't arrived yet. I said, "Okay, well, we can start by, let's clear out this room." And got everybody out of the room. And I had to go and take a peek. I wanted to see him first. And so I did. And then we just waited. You never want to get in a hurry. So we waited till Frank got there, waited until we got somebody from our latent print section there, roll them for fingerprints, do a comparison. Yes, that's the guy. Now we can go to work. And by this time, as this picture depicts, there were thousands of people outside. I mean, it was a madhouse outside. And then somebody passed the word that they were going to kill him when he came out. And so myself and LAPD Detective Paul Tippins we were the keepers of the guns. We've got guns. Our partners are in the back seat with Richard. And we have a motor. We had to wait till we got more officers there. They had a motorcade in front, motorcade behind, helicopters going overhead. And you'd have thought the president was in town. It was all for Richard. So.
Yeah, it was after we successfully kidnapped Richard Ramirez from the sheriffs. Our challenge really was this crowd, as he described. There were thousands of people outside of Hollenbeck Station, and as Gil indicated, there was a chant that went through the crowd, to kill him, lynch him. I think it had a couple of different verses to it. Not depicted in the slide presentation here, but in the book, there's another photograph, and it's Mayor Tom Bradley. Did you see him that day?
Yes.
That's speaks to the import of the case. Our mayor, long-serving mayor of Los Angeles, Tom Bradley, he responded to Hollenbeck Station, probably to do the same thing Gil did. Hey, what's this guy look like? The difference there is, and Tom Bradley was a retired lieutenant from the LAPD. The official story was he was there so he could calm the masses. I'm not sure that he did that very well. And did you get a chance to speak with him?
No. We were tied up. We didn't do anything. And, I remember I called my wife. Now, I affectionately call my wife Sister Mary Clarence. She's a sweetheart. She's a nice lady. Doesn't use profanities most of the time. I'm the heathen, that cartoon that's the angel over here. Oh, don't do it. And I'm the one on this side that do it. And so I called her up, and on August the 8th, she moved out with the kids. So I'm not coming back till this is over with. And so she was gone. I called her up. I said, it's over with. We have him in custody. What do you mean he's in custody? Why isn't he dead? I said, dear, calm down. That's ungodly. So I remember my cousin was getting married that day. They had the big festivities at the Pasadena Hilton. And so I just told her, I said, go there, get a room. Two of my daughters had something to do with the wedding. I don't know, passing out flowers, selling chiclets. I don't know. They were doing something. I said, I'll get down there when I can. So about 8:30 that night, I come walking in, 8:30, 9 o'clock, and one of my sisters, who never used to show affection towards me, one of my younger sisters, she comes up, she puts her arm, she says, ooh, I want to walk in with you, and she puts her arm around me. I said, what's this about? What for? You know, why all this? So you'll see. And I walk in, and I can hear people saying, there he is, that's him, that's him. And, okay, it's me, but I'm just Gil. And then my mom and sisters came up, and we all started crying. I said, it's over. It's over. Where's my wife? She was up in the room doing something, I don't know. She comes down, and I said, okay, let's go to the bar. I need a drink. So I go to the bar, and I order a cocktail, and somebody says, I'll buy his drink. And I said, oh, thank you. It's very kind of you, sir. And the bartender says, and if there's nobody here to sponsor a drink, it's on the house. You pay nothing tonight. And I said, oh, man. We could be best friends. And I went out. I said hello to my cousin, and then I told my wife, I said, you know what, I'm going to go up to the room. It's my cousin's night. It's Tommy's night. It's not my night. It's his wedding. I said, I'm going to go up to the room. I'll be up in the room. Not only that, I'm tired. And my daughter said, I want to go with you. And so we went up to the room. She put her PJs on, and all of a sudden the fire alarm starts going off. And I said, okay, don't panic. Felt the door, no heat. Okay, slowly open up the door. And then it's an all clear. It was an accident. You know, it was a dry run. And then the real work started. Went back to work the next day, and that's when the real work started. And so between June and about the end of September, I had no days off.
Right.
And it was all work.
An overdose of Richard Ramirez.
Yeah.
So, so on August 31st of 85, capture date?
That was his arrest date.
And the trial, and you went through motions and preliminary hearings and whatnot, but the trial, which was a protracted trial, starts on the 22nd of July in 1988. You guys went in, obviously, very prepared, and as you've talked about, very selective about the counts that were filed. Can you share with us what it was like? And, you know, I haven't sat in the IO seat for a long periods of time. I never sat there for almost a year and a half, but let these folks know what it's like when your life is court, which for an investigator is high stress because you don't want to come out of there a loser. And when you've got 50-some counts, what was it like sitting in the IO's chair every day?
Very boring. You know, you listen to everything, you listen to every word,
right.
And everything you're doing, it's very, very intense. You have to pay very close attention to everything, take notes, and then when you're done with today, everything you've done today, you're just prepping for tomorrow. So it's a long, laborious thing. My wife and one of my daughters that's here today, sitting right here in the front row, they went to trial. They've never done anything. You know, my work is my work, and they just, with all the hoopla, they wanted to see what it was like to go to trial. Just got them in. They went and sat there, and that was the day that one of our victims took the stand, and she cried her heart out. It was the defense counsel said, "Isn't it true? The only reason you can pick my client out today is because you've seen his picture in the paper right after it happened." And she said, no. And she started weeping, openly crying, said, no, I am a Shiite Muslim. And I went into, she went into hiding for 40 days and 40 nights. She went into seclusion, 40 days, 40 nights. No television, no radio, no newspaper, no nothing. I know it's him because he did it. You did this to me. Why did you do it to me? You took my child's father. You took my husband. He was my friend. You didn't have to do what I gave you, what I had. And it was gut-wrenching. Everybody, including the judge, was crying. And then she stopped and she said, I apologize to the court. Back in where she was from, she was a medical doctor. And so she composed herself and said, I apologize. And he said, would you like to take a recess. She says, no, we must continue. And she went on. So it's some very compelling stuff. Trial. Everything was done. Where the real tension comes in is when you're waiting for a verdict. Every day you're waiting. You know, what are they going to say? What are they going to do? We'd had our problems. One juror I believe one juror died. You know, they found her in her apartment, and they had to dismiss some jurors. And so now you're just waiting, and then the day comes in. And when they announced verdict on count 1, and I knew once they announced that verdict, the rest of them were going to come in. And I remember going home that night, later that night. I got home, I went to bed. I had never cried as an adult male. And I got in bed, and I started crying like a little baby. I started crying. And my wife just leaned over and said, "It's okay. He was with you." I missed my dad. I wished he could have been there on this day. I know he'd have been proud. So it was good. And then I went to sleep, didn't get in trouble, didn't get yelled at. It was all good the next morning.
Just real quick, and you talked about how how tense it was in the time between the conclusion of the trial and awaiting the verdicts. Ramirez churned through defense attorneys during the course of those 4 years, and at one point I think he wanted to defend himself.
No, he didn't want to defend. He didn't know what he wanted.
Right.
He had Alan Adashek from the
right,
and then he had some guy from Oxnard come down, and he died of a heart attack. And so they said, "Ooh, you know, what's he doing?" And then he finally ended up with Arturo and Daniel Hernandez. They weren't related, but we used to call them together the Hernandi. And they were overwhelmed. They had no idea what they were getting into. This was their first multiple murder case. They were proud of the fact they had one murder trial prior to this one, and it got reversed because of attorney incompetency, and they were proud. And then Michael Tynan, during trial, he could see the writing on the wall.
the judge.
The judge,
Right.
yes, I apologize. Michael Tynan, the judge, the trial judge, he appointed a good attorney to help him out. So there was 3 attorneys on their side. And Phil Halpin took the prelim deputy district attorney by himself. He ended up with ulcers, ended up in the hospital. And so then they brought on Alan Yokelson for trial, who was very competent. But make no mistake about it, Phil Halpin ran the ship. He ran all of us. You know, he roared like a lion, but he was a good-hearted and best DA I've ever worked with.
Great to hear. With this now 3 attorneys, what kind of defense did these guys mount?
They tried the wrong guy. You know, Richard wasn't there. Then they tried taking apart the investigators, and they couldn't find a weak link. Their attorney did some documentary, and the attorney that was assigned to help me says, "You know, we were trying everything there was." He says, and we finally got Richard's father to get up there and testify that Richard was back there during the time of some of these killings. Well, when his dad did that, I went home, and I used to have a binder with newspaper clippings, kept everything. Let's look. So I went back and I started looking, and I found a reporter that had interviewed the father the day after Richard's arrest. And the dad says, "I haven't seen him in months." So I immediately called up El Paso, Texas. "Hey, I'm looking for this reporter." I said, "Oh, he's no longer working here. He left years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago he left." And I said, "Where'd he go?" He said, "Well, we went to Miami." I said, "Okay, thank you." I called up Miami. Information. "Give me the 2 biggest newspapers you have in Miami." They gave them to me. And I said, "Okay." I called the first one, and I said, "Hey, please don't think I'm nuts. I'm a cop from L.A. I'm looking for this report." He says, "Oh, yeah, you want to talk to him? He's here right now." He got on the phone and said, "Hey, you remember doing this interview?" He said, "Oh, yeah, I remember doing it." I said, "How'd you like vacation in L.A.?" So we brought him out here, and then he got up there as a rebuttal witness.
Right.
And it just blew Daddy right out. You know, Ray Clark was the
Defense
other
attorney.
defense attorney, and Ray Clark says, "Hey, they just blew us out of the water. These guys were good. They did everything right." And you take luck over skill any day, you know. So
Well, I'm going to submit that wasn't luck. This was part of where I was going with this is the tense moments waiting between waiting during jury deliberation and the workload, massive workload to put the case together. Trial starts and the work just continues. And Gil just touched about it because somebody gets on a witness stand and says something, they've got to work to refute it. And in this case, and I'm here to tell you from a professional standpoint, that wasn't luck. This is a guy that knew what he was doing, and B, a guy that wasn't going to give up here. So it's a great story. What do you think about his vacation in L.A.?
I don't know. Everything was business, you know. It's just business. You know, I will share a funny with you though. As a result of this, when we went back to do some homework, because the father said he had been back there for a baptism, and we knew where he worked. So I said, okay. So I called up a buddy of mine from El Paso, and I said, hey, we need to go out there. The guy's name was Dwayne Johnson, Donald. Called up Dwayne Johnson and said, we need to go out there. This is what we're looking for. Can you have things ready for us? So we flew into El Paso, and he picked us up at the airport, and he says, okay. He says, you wanted the dad's work records. He worked for the railroad. Yes. I said, okay. And you wanted to find out if there had been, yes, okay. We already went to the church. Yes, Richard was there. We've got all the records. We got that. And what about Dad's? He says, all his records are back in L.A. So today is Friday. How long are you guys going to be out here? Well, we got to be back by Sunday night. He says, okay. You want to go to the hotel first, or would you like to go wet your whistle first? They had done all the work for us, and it was a nice weekend.
As nice as it can be in El Paso.
That's right. Hey, I tell you what, they have I'll call it a restaurant because bar sounds too tough. On Sunday morning, they open up at 6 in the morning with cocktails and menu, though. It doesn't get any better than that for people like me.
And these are the gentlemen from the district attorney's office, Phil Halpins, the bearded felon. Sorry for the pixelation. I don't know what happened with that. Alan Yokelson was the co-prosecutor. And this is probably the most important part of it. As we mentioned earlier, guilty counts were returned on for every criminal charge that was filed against him. He was sentenced to death. Yeah, it speaks for itself. So before we wrap that up, I want to talk to Gil about a couple things that are specific to A, courtroom behavior by Ramirez, and then B, some stuff that happened after he went to prison. So when we talked way back when, you told me about his behavior when he entered the courtroom, held in a jail cell adjoining that's adjacent to the courtroom, and then there's a big wooden door that they pass through. I think the photograph with the bailiff may have shown it. When he walked in the courtroom, what did he do?
When he walked in the courtroom, the first thing he'd do, depending on what courtroom we were in, he'd walk in, and if in fact he's walking to the table this way, the judge would be over here, the audience would be over here. He'd walk in and he'd scan the audience looking for good-looking women. He'd pick one out. That's the one he was going to look at. He'd go face the judge. Now when it's time to recess for him to get up, everybody had to remain in their seats, and he'd get up and just smile and stare and give her winks, whatever he wanted to do, and he'd walk out. Want me to tell him about the attorneys?
Yeah.
Okay. So one day, sitting there at counsel table, testimony's going on, the bailiff says, hey, phone's for you. So I get up and I go sit next to the bailiff. And I'm talking on the phone and finish my call, hang up, and now they're going to recess. Richard gets up. I had noted there were two attorneys. They were dressed to the 10. They were very nice looking ladies. Reminded me so much of my wife. And very attractive. And so They walked in and they sat on the aisle. So there's nothing between, the aisle's right here, and Richard's going to walk in front of them. And he had noted when they walked in, they smiled. As he's walking on the way out, the one on the aisle side looked at him, he smiled, and she opened up her legs. Ew, on you. I wanted to go into custody. She did that and blew him a kiss, and I'm saying, holy Jesus. And I went back and I told my partner, I said, hey, I want to get arrested. Is this what goes along with the territory? I mean, there were all kinds of women that would go in there to look at him, and some very ugly, some very attractive. But these were, you'd think they were smart, business attorneys. And maybe she was just joking with them. I don't know. But, oh, terrible.
Yeah, and there was one other behavior that I thought was very curious, and it turns out that it was associated with Richard's business aspirations, his sunglasses.
Well, that he wanted to wear, he didn't want to take off his sunglasses, and he left them on, and then we got him with pictures, sunglasses, the same ones that he wore in there, and there were things in it. He wore them, and God bless her, Sophie Dickman was a spry lady in her late 60s when this happened. She had worked the psychiatric ward over at USC Medical Center and worked the emergency room. She'd seen all kinds of stuff. And she testified that because he actually sexually assaulted her and had anal penetration, so it was a sodomy. And she said he was quite a handsome young man. And she was afraid that because he couldn't maintain an erection that he might be embarrassed and kill her because he couldn't maintain it out of embarrassment, but he didn't. And when she said in courtroom that he was quite a handsome young man, Richard turned around. He was embarrassed then. And he looks at me and he says, that wasn't me. And I'm saying, you sick individual, sick man.
Didn't he express to you at one point that he thought he was going to establish his own line of sunglasses?
That I don't, if it was described to me, maybe I told you that. I don't know. Was I on my second glass of wine? I don't. No, I don't remember what he. No, that I can't say. He did.
Now, over time, following the conviction, you maintained contact with him, infrequent, but you did maintain contact with him. Can you share with the folks what that was like?
Well, there is no. You have to understand that. Yes, he is the worst man I've ever talked to. If you look at him in anything, there is. But yet, I have a job to do. My job was to try and gather evidence, try and gather facts to make a presentation. So, in realities, I talked to Richard no different than I talked to anybody else in life. And I called him Rich. He called me Gil. He called my partner Mr. Salerno, because Mr. Salerno had been very public. He had worked on the Hillside Strangler before. And Richard was a well-read individual. He was smarter than any murder suspect. Self-taught, well-read than any murder suspect I had ever interviewed. And I said, Rich, hey, brother, we get along, And I knew why we get along, because I was a product of the streets, and I knew gang jargon, and I knew how to talk, where the other guys were not. And so we got along good. I said, but you call him Mr. Salerno. Yeah, but I said, what'd you think? He was 7 foot tall and hovered? He puts his pants on just like one leg at a time, just like me and you, brother. And he says, yeah, but that's Mr. Salerno, Gil. So he was awestruck with Salerno, but he wasn't any different than anybody else. When I go up there, he sees him. They made a big deal out of one day in court. He walked in and he looked at me and he goes, Órale, Carrillo. And all the news media said, oh, what was that, a threat? What was going on? And the only one that really understood was Tony Valdez from Channel 11. And it still is a joke between Tony and myself. Tony and I turned out to be very dear friends, as did Henry Alfaro at the time. And every time I still hear from Tony. And he'll send me a text, and he'll start with, Órale, Carrillo. So it was good.
When was the last time you saw him?
Richard?
Yeah.
geez, probably in the mid-90s, early to mid-90s was the last time I saw them. They wanted to prosecute up in San Francisco. And I thought it was absurd because by the time we already had them sentenced to death down here, they wanted all of our surviving victims to go testify over there, which would have been at least 10 to 15 years after the fact. And if any of their testimony changed back then, that would give them grounds for to give us a new trial down here. And the DA up there was a guy by the name of Arlo Smith. And he was running for office again, and his opponent was saying Arlo is soft on crime. So now he wanted to use all these cases down here so he could have multiple murders up there and get the death penalty. And I wouldn't help him out. I said, no, no, no. They threatened to get a bench warrant out after me, and I finally had to get an audience with the sheriff, who sent me up with county. I said, I ain't going up there unless you give me county counsel. And so county counsel went up there, saw Rich. Rich had told me that he would cop out to 4 more murders that he had down here in L.A., but it was going to take about 7 years, and he never did. He got mad at me, so I miss him. He passed away on June 7th, 2013. I was attending my grandson's graduation from junior high school that day. The social butterfly in our family was up in the balcony. She goes, Dad, look, Richard just died pulling custody. And I just said, I don't care. I'm here for my grandson. I don't give two breaths about that stuff. Leave me alone. So we went on. This went on 40 more minutes. We leave. As soon as it's over, I looked at my phone. I had a ton of messages on there. And by the time I got home, within an hour after I got home, I had Channel 7, Channel 2, Channel 5. They had a bunch. They were all down my house looking for what did I think? I just think he lost his appeal.
And that's a great end to the Richard Ramirez story. And needless to say, thanks for all the work you did. But there's still one issue that we need to close up here. We need some closure on before we head into questions and answers here. Can you let him know what happened to his pair of shoes?
What happened? Yeah, I'll tell you what happened. Getting upset.
We were talking about San Francisco.
Mayor Feinstein and all of her Mayor back then, Feinstein, and all of her infinite wisdom, we went up to San Francisco and we showed them the Avia footprint because they had the murder up there, Peter Pan murder. And we went up there to take a look at it, and we showed them some stuff. And they said, this is not for public consumption. We're looking for, we have a car, we have these shoes, we need these things, and this is just for your cops. This is not for public. By the time we got back to L.A., we walked into the old Hall of Justice, and then as we walk in, our information bureau, or the news media section, was right there. And they said, hey, fellas, come on in here. Take a look at this. And it's Mayor Feinstein with our shoe prints, with the car, with a caliber gun, and what we're doing. And I remember I was so upset. And we walked upstairs to our office, and I finally just said, forget this stuff. Let's go down to Yimi Lou's. It was a local church down in Chinatown. And so we went in there, and our captain was in there, and we're crying the blues. We need to do something. You got to stand up to this lady. And, something's got to be done to stop this stuff. And the sheriff's got to know about it. And the sheriff was at some kind of parade in Antelope Valley, a big parade for them out there. And so the captain says, all right, I'm out of here. I got to go. You guys be careful. He called up about 30 minutes later, and he says, you guys stop drinking, get something to eat, and be back here at 7 o'clock tonight. So we went back. The sheriff had come in and called for a press conference. And I won't tell you what he said off camera, but the bottom line was, he says, if she doesn't shut her trap, I'll embarrass her. And so he put it out to all politicians to please leave it alone. And then we went back into his office, and he said, well, fellas, how did it go? And my only response was, you just put a smile back on two otherwise tired and let down cops. We're ready to go back to work tomorrow morning, boss. So it's the way it was. She did it. But I'm not angry.
Did you ever find out where those shoes wound up?
Yeah. Richard told us he threw them off the Golden Gate Bridge after he heard they went public. And a gun.
So some of the, obviously, we talked about the biggest evidence in the case unnecessarily got tossed because of some indiscretions, let's put it that way. So we now know what happened to Richard. We know what happened to the shoes. Gil's been nothing but accommodating and fascinating in my estimation. So I want to open it up to questions.
Yes, sir.
We need to get a microphone to him real quick.
I apologize.
Hi, I was asking, about the fingerprints you're saying back in the days when someone didn't have to fingerprints. In what year did that change, the laws?
It wasn't a law. It was already in effect. They had started, by this time, putting all felons in there. It was just that there was so much work to be done. Once they got all the felons, then they started adding misdemeanors to it. It was already available. So it was just a matter of catching up. That's when they started putting misdemeanors in there. So the law was passed. And you have another question up there. And then...
Órale, Carrillo. How are you? In your time with Ramirez, did he ever show any sign of remorse for what he did?
Excellent question. He showed remorse on two different occasions. He asked us to send his apologies to Whitney Bennett, the teenagers that lived. He also, the only time he actually showed remorse, and he's talking to us, he kidnapped a girl out of Northeast Division. She was 10 years old at the time, took her, sexually assaulted her, and she survived. All the kids around here all survived. And he told me later that his only concern was, because he had been to that house once before, and the night that he took her, a little puppy got out, and he felt bad for the puppy. Here is right. He's kidnapped a young lady, a little girl, but he felt bad for the puppy. Okay. We have a question right over here. And the lady that's going to ask this question, I didn't ask her to ask a question, but she came to, these are friends of mine all the way from high school days. Yolanda and Marie, thank you for being here today.
Our pleasure. Gil, knowing you and knowing Pearl as long as you say, well, since high school, and knowing your accomplishments, especially with this situation and involvement in such a high, profile case, I always wondered, knowing what you had to go through, knowing that you had to sit across this individual, which in all is evil, and seeing that evil in his eye, and seeing what you saw in what he committed. My question for you is, how long did it take you to actually recover from putting this all aside so that you could go back and make that relationship again, telling your kids, I'm back and I'm home?
It actually only took 2 trips to the Code 7 with Don Garcia. He let me forget all. I never had nightmares. I had the support of friends. We went through the trials and everything. Everything was, it's like you talk about football players or baseball players that are playing on game day, they put on their game face. And when they're not on game day, they're just regular people. And I hope that I've never changed. I told a guy from the United Kingdom, I was doing an interview, and he said, has this case impacted your life? And I started laughing, and he said, I'm quite serious. And I said, Aiden, and has this case impacted my life? Right now you're spending thousands and thousands of dollars to get this recording for your television program. He says, yes. And I said, you take away this case and I'm just another overweight Hispanic detective in LA County. I see there is no difference. So with the support of friends and my family, of course, and there's only been a couple of times in all the years that I really have had nightmares about Richard. And so I keep telling my wife I hit her. I thought she was him. Thank you. Okay, let's fight over the microphone. Excuse me.
You grew up in Pico Rivera.
Yes, I did.
As did I. Fellow Pico. I thought I had heard that there was a footprint found there?
Was
that true?
There were two cases in Pico, neither one of which got much publicity because it was just Pico. No, just. One was the home of John Rodriguez, who was a deputy sheriff. He was home. He was asleep in the bedroom, and the wife was asleep on the couch. I don't know who was in trouble, He tells me she was sick. Wasn't too long. It must have been a good illness. They got divorced. So I shouldn't laugh and make fun of John. But he's asleep in his bedroom, and they hear some noise, and she says, John, is that you? And he comes walking out of the bedroom. It's what, me? I'm asleep. And she says, somebody just tried to come in through the dining room window. She says, no, they didn't. I can make fun of Hispanics because I'm Mexican myself. He says, remember when I painted last summer? He says, the paint sealed around the window. I never cleaned it up. It's stuck closed. So he moved the curtain back, and there's paint chips all over. So she said, call the cops. And he says, I am a cop. She says, no, you're not. You work the jails. So she called the cops, and this guy had put a box, the first patrol deputy had gotten there. He put a box over the footprint, and it was the EVA footprint. Richard was there. And he put this yellow crime scene tape around two houses. And if anybody, including me, would have tried to get in there without going through him, he'd have shot him. No doubt about it. And he did an excellent job. So he hit that night, and then he hit now, my daughter lives in the house that I grew up in Pico. And so he actually hit about 2 blocks away from the house. And he got up, went into the house, ended up what they call the old schoolboy press. Remember, you got a guy down the ground and some guy's knees are right here on top of you. Call me uncle, call me daddy, or give me your money. Where's your mommy? And so Richard is on top of her in bed. And she didn't fight. She just calmly said, don't you have a mother? What about your mother? And Richard got up and walked out of the house. And that was on Los Toros, just a few blocks. And I try to tell my mom, because my mom, says, at that time, during that time, you could, she'd sleep with the door open, the door unlocked, just a screen door. And I'm telling her, Mom, you got to close it up. And it was a very tough thing on me because we're trying to keep everything secret. Don't want panic to be spread around LA County. So who do I tell? Do I tell just my immediate family? Well, what about my neighbors? And what about their neighbors? And what about other relatives and kids and everything else? I was using my mother-in-law as bait. I was advertising where she lived in the paper. That didn't work. I just say that because my wife's here.
Hi, I'm Emily, and I produce the Totally Weird Los Angeles podcast. And we cover a lot of true crime stuff here in the context of Los Angeles. But one of the questions that I'm curious about is, are there other crimes out there that are quote-unquote unsolved or unprosecuted that you feel were committed by Ramirez?
We looked at 8 different cases that we didn't prosecute. But there was insufficient evidence to say, even in my mind, did he really do it? There's some similarities, there's some stuff, a lot of things that are out there. But I also learned in my world, you got to be able to prosecute, you got to have the evidence, you got to do it. If not, it remains unsolved. Don't waste your time. Wait until you have something substantial to bite into.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Terry. Thank you for all your service to the city of Los Angeles and California. And my friend Patty and I, we were living in the San Gabriel Valley in our 20s, and we were really scared. And anyway, God, we slept with our windows shut and locked, and everybody had their air conditioner on in the San Gabriel Valley that I knew, but we were really, really scared. The question I have is, how did he pick out his victims?
He would, if you, not so much today, but during that time period, if you drove around at night, people had, hot summer night, had their shades open, screens there, and lights on the inside, so you could see what kind of people lived there. He used to literally lust after Asians. You talk about Asians, he'd go, so he lusted after Asians. And he would see as he's driving by who looks like they've got good booty. Not this booty, but stuff to steal. So it was a sexual thing driving him, and had to have good stuff. So he'd go, and then he'd go back later that night. Had nothing to do with houses. He didn't pick any poverty-stricken areas, lower income areas, because he knew that they'd probably be awake and drinking and kill him if they got him. And plus, they didn't have the good stuff, because all the good stuff was hawked to buy more booze or dope, whatever they wanted to buy. Oh, yes.
Hi, I have a question regarding, I'm sure there was a mental health diagnosis that they try to use, before the trial, or did you ever hear of one, and if so, did you agree with it, or do you think it was just part of?
I didn't hear the first part. Did you say something about, were there any?
Did they contemplate an insanity plea at any
Oh,
point?
they didn't contemplate, but I don't know whose request it was, whether it was just the courts or the prosecution side. They wanted him evaluated for psychological problems, because certainly that would have been a defense. But the doctor that went to talk to him only lasted about 30 minutes, and Richard threw him out. Richard did not want anybody to believe that he did this because he was nuts. He was of sound mind. He did it because he wanted to do it. He was, it's kind of like Ted Bundy. As a matter of fact, Ted Bundy and him used to correspond with each other. If I'd have had any intestinal fortitude at all, what I really wanted to do when they executed Ted Bundy was send Richard a telegram saying, "Hey, see you in hell, signed Ted Bundy."
Did that get to your question about the mental health issues?
Órale, Carrillo.
Ladies and gentlemen, my dear friend Tony Valdez from Channel 11.
Hey, Florence Cooper's courtroom. It's the arraignment, and he says, "Hail Satan."
Hail Satan.
What was your reaction? What do you remember about that moment?
Pendejo. He said, "Hail Satan." He put his hand up. He had the pentagram right here. We were able to shove that right up the backside because we used that. We showed the pentagrams in our case, on one of the lady's legs and on the wall from the Monrovia case, that he had it right there. It didn't mean much to me. Just thought he was showboating from the time we talked to him. He had an ego, and he told us the very first time, he said, "Hey, Gil," he says, "I got an ego that'll fill this room." He was an articulate man. He didn't, like I said, he's smarter than the average killer. Great to see you.
Was the jury seated when he came in and did that?
No, that was just time for arraignment. It was arraignment
that's
court
right.
when he went in. Yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry, I forgot they got to get the mic to you.
Okay, I wondered, did you get any pushback from the families related to the kid cases when you decided to drop them? Was there any pushback, or was it mostly relief?
No, they were relieved. There was nothing at all. In 2010, after I retired, I was going to meet my wife camping locally at Benelli Park, and up there at East Shore. And when I got there, she said, "My God, what's wrong?" I mean, I had been crying because I got a phone call from Homicide Bureau. Said, "Hey, there's a lady who would like to talk to you. Here's her name. Here's her number." And I called her up, and it was the 6-year-old's mother. And she had seen Channel 2, which was unheard of at the time. Channel 2 did a 4-minute and 28-second segment airtime on my retirement. And I mean, I was only Gil Carrillo, lieutenant. I mean, you don't get that. And it was there, and they talked about this case, and I talked about, without mentioning any names, how that young lady brought tears to my eyes. And she was such a beautiful young lady. And however, I never wanted to follow up on any of the kids' cases, none of them, because it would have broke my heart if I'd have found out that they had psychological problems later on in life. I just prayed and hoped that they grew up fine. Well, it's her mother. And she said she had seen the piece, the family had seen the piece, and they were just so happy because I was like their family member. She said, "You treated my daughter so good. You treated her as if she were your own." And every time we'd see you on the news after that, at a murder scene, everybody had run to the TV and see you. We followed you, and you now know. I said, we didn't want to follow up because I want to make sure she was okay. And I heard from Arcadia that she was growing up to be good. She was doing Greek dancing. And she says, well, she's done real good. She's married. She had twins. Her and her husband were now both physical therapists down in the San Diego area. And so we were both crying on the phone. It was such an emotional moment. And my wife said, what's wrong? And I told her all about it. And it was just a nice day. So I didn't follow up on her. I heard the one out of Northeast Division. I understand she had some problems. I heard back she had some problems. I was lecturing one day at a college, and a young man came up and said, she used to talk about that, and she was such a liar, and she started using, and we just stood away from her, so I felt bad.
Hi. The father apparently perjured himself in court.
Yes.
Did anything happen to him because of that?
No. He perjured himself. He was the guy's dad, but hey, the bottom line, we were victorious, and we really didn't care. Perjury's a tough one to he could have said, hey, I didn't. You have to have intent to perjure, and he could have just said, I made a mistake. It wasn't worth the time. And personally, I work murders. I don't care about that little stuff. But we didn't do anything with it. Yes, ma'am.
Did you interview any of his family members, or what did they have to say?
I didn't. We had a couple of investigators go down to Texas to talk to them, looking for recovered stolen property. I went up to the mother and sister, and I introduced myself to them when we were getting ready to start trial by then. And I introduced myself to them, and I said, if you ever have any questions you feel like you want to ask me, feel free to ask me. I will never ask you one question about your son or your brother. I know you love him, and that's where you should be. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. I also suggest if you want to contact me, maybe you ought to speak with their attorneys first, with his attorneys. They may advise you don't do that, and I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but I'm here if ever you need me. Richard told me later on that some locals down in El Paso were giving the family a hard time. And so I called up my friends in El Paso. I said, hey, keep an eye on them. They had nothing to do with this. And Richard had said he'd have copped out to everything if he could have just figured out a way to lay it on his mother. He You didn't know how to tell her everything.
We got time for just one more. I'm sorry, we'll take yours as well.
I was just wondering if you can add any context to how he was finally caught by the people, how they recognized him. I understand that they beat him once they captured him.
Well, let's dispel the myth right now. Phil Carrillo, in his book and on a documentary he did, Phil was a dear friend of mine. He passed away a few years ago from Lou Gehrig's disease. But he says these people got him and beat him, and they didn't even know who he was. What happened was, per our informant, we knew that he liked to hang around the Greyhound bus depot, which at that time was at 6th and Los Angeles. So we put cops all around 6th and Los Angeles. We put on we asked LAPD for assistance, and we asked them for their SIS team, which is a special group of people. And Richard was a very dangerous and wild man. So they set up all around, and they had undercover people inside the bus depot. And the informant told us, "Hey, Richard will make you guys. Trust me, you guys can look dirty, but your teeth aren't rotten, you don't stink, your hair is clean. So you got to look like a Belker from that old Hillside Blues or whatever.
Hill Street Blues.
Hill Street Blues. Yeah. I guess you got to look like Belky." And so Richard, what we didn't know, we expected him to come walking into the bus depot. He came in from Arizona because he had gone to look for his brother in Phoenix, come back on a Greyhound. The Greyhound went in, and as soon as he got off the bus, started walking in the terminal. There's too many people around here, something's wrong. He turned around and walked back out the way the bus came in. So he got away, went to a liquor store, saw his mug on the front page. Then he got on an RTD bus, now whatever they're called today, MTA. And all he had to do was make it about 8 miles. He had a brother that lived at Olympic and Brannock. And when the bus stopped at Olympic and Soto, some passenger gave one of these. And so they were at a red light. He ding, 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 ding. He jumped off the bus. Richard saw him go to the phone booth, and now he's dialing 911. Passing by a gentleman from the gas company, he sees him. He's flagged down and said, "Hey, follow that bus. This guy's on there." So he started following the bus, made it down to about Olympic and Lorena, which is just about a half mile up the road there, a mile maybe. He gets off the bus, and then he starts running, and he starts running in a northeasterly direction, over fences, across the 5 freeway. He ends up on Indiana. Now he gets on Indiana. He tries to jack one guy for his car. Didn't work. He goes around a block on Hubbard Street, and he sees a lady, so now he's going to jack her. She starts screaming. Her husband, who was a good guy, grabbed a tire iron or a piece of pipe. I don't know what he grabbed, but he grabbed and ran up there and hit the guy in the head. Got him 2 good licks. Well, the neighbors hear the screaming, see their neighbor fighting with this guy, so Richard tries running away. They get him down. They hold him there. They don't beat him to death. Had it been the gang members that caught him there, they would have killed him just because he's messing in their territory. But they held him, and then here comes Andy Ramirez, the boot cop, click, and it's all over with, and that's how he was captured. We did give the Burgoyne family, we gave them some money because we had money to distribute. We gave 10 grand to some guy named Perez, Jesse Perez, because he was, Richard used to smoke dope with him. And he told our guys the day of Richard's arrest, we had 2 of our guys and old Jesse flying down to TJ, and they went and recovered one of the guns and some jewelry and a radio from TJ because Jesse had given his girlfriend this stuff, and so they brought it back over here, and it's all stolen, recovered property, and one of the guns had been used in the murder. So we gave Jesse 10 grand, we gave the Burgoynes some money. We're looking for a guy named Alejandro Espinoza, who was my informant. And talking to Richard, Richard says, "He's dead." I said, "What do you mean he's dead?" "Yeah, he OD'd." I said, "How'd you find out?" He said, "We still hear shit that goes on the outside. He's dead." And I said, oh, okay. He says, but why don't you give the money to his wife? He's got a couple of kids. And I said, not a bad idea. So we went to that program, Unsolved Mysteries. And Robert Stack, Cop Mas Macho, he gave, they did a show on it, and we tried to give away the money. We had a bunch of people trying to claim that they were the wife of Alejandro Espinosa, but they didn't have the right answers. And the realities are, we didn't even know if that was his true name. That was the name he gave us. I didn't care. And he's the guy that finally said, yeah, that's him. You know, he identified him for us. And so it was good. That's how he was actually captured.
Now, just real quick, we'll get to that. The significance of the Greyhound station. You guys also recovered a bunch of.
Oh yeah, we went in and we recovered his. We called it his kill kit. There was lockers there, and he had his clothing in there. We found some ammunition in there. We didn't recover any guns from it, but we recovered guns elsewhere. Right. Yes.
Thank you very much again for everything you did. I had just a quick question. I know he originally was from Texas.
Yes.
Was there anything that you might have suspected that he might have done there? Or also, could you kind of tell us why he ended up picking this San Gabriel, like the San Gabriel area, Southern California area? Was there a specific reason?
I don't know why he specifically came out here other than they had a Skid Row. It was easy to live. You know, he was a thief and a dope user, and it's a mecca for trouble. So it fit right in his alley. He's from El Paso. We didn't find anything in El Paso that was attributed to him. El Paso, my good friends over there, they solved all their murders. They didn't have any unsolved. And I'm sure he's good for burglaries over there. We did find a case in Phoenix that 2 elderly people, senior citizens, survived. And there's no doubt in my mind it was him. And Richard used to say, where's the money? Where's the jewelry? Shut up, bitch. And he said that in almost every one of these things. And so I told Richard, hey, we talked to Phoenix, hey, we know our guy, and I don't know if they had the print or not, but the MO, everything was the same, including the verbiage. And we called Phoenix and said, nah, we don't need it. We don't want it. We don't need a headache. So he did nothing about it. I told Richard about it. He said, that wasn't me. I said, come on, Rich. Why you want to lie to me now? Ray Charles could figure this one out. And he says, okay. I said, they're not going to do anything with it. You know, and it was his, but they didn't die. So we know we went from there. And we had our investigators went back 5 years previous to what we were working on, trying to find out everything.
All righty, sir. Well, thank you all. And a big hand for Gil Carrillo.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.